then the committee will be prepared to move forward and support the VA's work at St. Albans. So for those reasons, we will accept the amendment, and I'm looking forward to the day when Mr. Meeks comes and tells us the VA is in his office and earn his support and the support of the community. And I'll yield back to balance my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of the Meeks Amendment, which not only affects his district, but affects at least 11 congressional districts that surround his district, all in support of our veterans and fighting men and women who have returned from wars overseas, some of them severely injured and in need of our care, concern, and support at this very moment. For 7 years now, the Department of Veterans Affairs has pursued a perhaps well-intentioned but a stubbornly wrong-headed plan for the St. Albans Primary and Extended Care Facility, which is located in the county of Queens. I'm very concerned that the VA is proceeding full speed ahead with its plans to lease a property for 34 years, property currently dedicated exclusively for veterans. And what are these veterans supposed to do for the next 75 years without this facility, when there is a rising demand among our veterans for medical services? The justification, and you have to hear this, the justification for the VA's decision stems from an absurd, outdated report that relied on data from 2003, 8 years ago, when we're only at the beginning of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have unfortunately seen tremendous increases in veterans' homelessness, foreclosures, divorce, substance abuse, PTSDs, and yes, suicides. And yet the VA report from all those years ago projected at that time, almost a decade ago, that mental health services for our veterans was going to decrease over the next 20 years. It's been 8 years since that report. And what have we seen during the 8 years alone? And there's 12 years more to go. We've seen increases in all of these problems among our veterans. And yet they cling stubbornly to the data in that report, thinking that these things are going to go down among our veterans. And this, everybody knows, is certainly not going to be the case. All evidence suggests that returning veterans are going to require a greater significant increase, especially in VA mental health services. A RAND Center report alone found that already 18.5% of all U.S. service members who have returned already from Afghanistan and Iraq currently suffer from PTSD or depression, and that 19.5% suffer from traumatic brain injury. Where is the Veterans Administration, where is the administration's common sense? To give away this property, which is intended and secured right now for our veterans, is a huge mistake based on a report that is already discredited by the facts. This is something that we can't allow to continue. These are veterans who have sacrificed so much. We have to stand here today on the floor, and I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, colleagues in the majority especially, for seeing through the politics of this and understanding that these are our veterans that we're fighting for, that we as members of Congress understand our constituencies and our needs and their needs. And I want to personally thank Representatives Grimm and King, who are among our delegation, as well as the rest of the Democratic members of our delegation in our region, and thank Representative Meeks for his dynamic and great leadership in bringing this to our attention so that we could stand together as patriotic Americans all, at least on this issue, and fight for the needs of our veterans. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Do any other members seek recognition on the amendment? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Gentleman, please specify which of his two amendments.
Number 17.
The clerk will designate.
Yes.
The gentleman's amendments are numbers 4 and 5 in the congressional record. Which amendment does he seek to take up?
Number 4.
Designate.
Amendment number 4, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Amash of Michigan.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the Davis-Bacon Act requires nearly all federal construction contracts to pay a prevailing wage determined by the Department of Labor. Under the law, construction contractors and subcontractors may not pay their own workers wages lower than the department's pay rate, even if the workers bargain for a wage below the government set rate. My amendment blocks application of Davis-Bacon to the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill. There are two main reasons why the House should block Davis-Bacon. First, Davis-Bacon wastes taxpayer dollars on overpriced contracts. A recent study showed that, on average nationwide, the government set rate is 22% higher than the true market rate. For example, sheet metal workers in Long Island, New York are paid $28.79 per hour, while the government set rate for that area is $45.40. Factoring in the cost of materials and other supplies, studies suggest that the federal government overpays for construction contracts by between 10% and 15%. Second, Davis-Bacon gives an unfair advantage to union employees. Small businesses, many of which are non-union, lower their prices to compete against larger union firms. The trade-off for non-union employees is a lower wage rate, but more work. We should not disadvantage non-union employees who are willing to perform more construction for less money. By eliminating government-mandated wages, we can better allocate resources, increase efficiency, and put hard-working Americans back on the job. Providing for our national defense and the care of our veterans are critical priorities. Construction projects in the appropriations bill include VA facilities, family housing, schools, and infrastructure for our National Guard troops stationed on the border. We owe it to our constituents to stretch every taxpayer dollar and spend wisely. Blocking Davis-Bacon's application to military construction and VA projects will honor our commitment to fiscal responsibility and to our veterans. Let's let competition determine wages, not the federal government. Please support my amendment to block Davis-Bacon. At this time, I'd like to yield as much time as you may consume to the gentleman from Texas. I yield back.
The gentleman yields to the gentleman from Texas, and he has 2.5 minutes remaining on his time.
That's fine. I'll take it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the gentleman from Michigan for bringing this important amendment. I strongly support this amendment and urge the House to adopt the gentleman's amendment because it will save, again, our children and grandchildren a significant amount of money. We're in an era of austerity unlike anything America has ever experienced. We are living on borrowed money. Every dollar the federal government brings in goes right out the back door to pay for the existing social safety net. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt, and veterans benefits consume 104% of America's revenue. Therefore, all the money we appropriate for the entire year for military construction, for the VA, for transportation, for Homeland Security, for the Defense Department, all of it is borrowed. Therefore, we need to do everything we can to cut, to save money, to eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse, and to avoid spending more money than we should. And here, very straightforward, the gentleman's amendment would save American taxpayers a significant amount of money. It depends on what study you're looking at, but my very capable staff has looked at this and analyzed a whole variety of studies that indicate that there's a whole range of savings. The Chamber of Commerce believes that the Davis-Bacon paying union prevailing wages in, for example, a free market environment like in Texas, we don't pay prevailing wage. We in Texas on a highway project pay the competitive free market wage. First of all, not only are we going to save money, but why would we discourage competition? Why would, in this terrible economy, would we prevent contractors, businesses, from coming in and competing for a job? As on the last amendment, which Mr. LaTourrette's amendment, which I hope the House defeats, that amendment we need to defeat so that we could encourage companies to come in and compete for federal contracts. This amendment needs to be adopted to encourage businesses to come in and compete for federal contracts. This would expand the universe of companies that could compete and apply for work. As in Texas, for example, on a highway project, we pay the competitive best price for bids. And in the Chamber of Commerce's opinion, if we eliminate the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage, it would save about 15% on average on project construction. The Cato Institute estimates a 10% savings. Heritage estimates about 22%.
The gentleman's time has expired.
If I may strike the last word.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized to strike the last word for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. If I could, Mr. Chairman, point out that the Heritage Foundation estimates that there will be 22% savings to taxpayers by eliminating the Davis-Bacon requirement. The Beacon Hill Institute at Suffolk University in Boston estimates a 10% savings. This whole variety of savings, if you line them up, if you even, for example, we'll just say for the sake of argument that there was about a 10% savings in construction costs. We as a nation living on borrowed money should not voluntarily, willingly pay 10% more. It makes no sense. So the gentleman's amendment is extraordinarily important. It will save taxpayers a significant amount of money on every construction project. On average, you're going to wind up saving, under the gentleman's amendment, about 10%. 10% goes a long way on a lot of these massive construction projects. The gentleman's amendment is vitally important in this economy. His adoption of the gentleman's amendment will increase the number of jobs available for people to work on federal projects. The gentleman's amendment will create jobs, save money for taxpayers in an era of record debt, record deficit, and record burden that we simply cannot pass on to our kids. It's vitally important that the House approve the gentleman's amendment, and I urge its adoption. And yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. What
move to strike the last word.
Does the gentleman claim time in opposition?
Opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to this amendment. The Davis-Bacon Act is a pretty simple concept, and it's a fair concept. What it does is to protect the government as well as the workers in carrying out the policy of paying decent wages for government contracts. I've noticed that the previous speaker was really concerned about the possibility that Davis-Bacon would raise the cost of the performance of these contractors, but it only requires that prevailing wages in the area where the contract is going to be performed is maintained. For example, if in some of our urban areas where labor costs are very, very high and the prevailing wages are there, the standard of living and the wage payment for that area would be consistent. If it was in a lower wage area, then Davis-Bacon wages would be the wages that were paid in that market. So basically it just allows the workers to be paid at a rate consistent with where the project is being conducted. The Act requires that every construction contract which the federal government participates in with in excess of $2,000 has to have this provision defining the minimum wage. Now, it was taken up by this House just a few days ago, and of course 3 times this House has defeated attempts to repeal this Davis requirement. It would appear to me that this House has exercised great wisdom 3 times in this session in preserving the right of workers to earn the wages that are paid in the area where the project is being constructed. That just makes sense. We want our workers to be paid fairly. We don't want the government to overpay, so we won't pay higher wages in an area where prevailing wages are lower. We won't pay lower wages in an area where the prevailing wages are higher, where the cost of living is higher, where the cost of doing business is higher, where the cost of doing the construction would be higher. We want the government to get the best bang for the buck. And these amendments are probably very well intentioned. We want to save the taxpayers' dollars, but we cannot and we should not be penny-wise and pound-foolish. The repeal of Davis-Bacon, I think that this House has stated on at least 3 occasions on this floor during this session of Congress would be pound-foolish. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California?
I rise to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5
I
minutes.
join the gentleman from Georgia in opposing this amendment and associate myself with his remarks. The federal government is in a different position from a private company having construction done for 2 reasons. First, one of the greatest social problems we face in this country is the eroding wages of middle-class families. We see that even in times when there are sufficient jobs, the average American doesn't make any more on an inflation-adjusted basis than a decade or 2 decades ago. The federal government should not play a role in pushing down people out of the middle class. We have a social responsibility to work to a return to what used to be the American norm, and that is that each generation does better than the last. But the second, even from a crudely proprietary position, the federal government is in a very different position than a private homeowner, private property owner. I know I was tempted last time we fixed our home. Maybe I should go with the slipshod cheapskate company. After all, I'm only going to live there a few more years. And even many private owners they're only going to own the building for a few years. So many of us in our daily lives use government-constructed projects from the 1930s. When the government builds something, it is normally going to be owned and operated by the government and used by our citizens for many, many decades. Why do we want slipshod construction? Why do we want those who are not looking to have skilled craftsmen and craftswomen, but rather are looking to slap it up there the cheapest possible way? Our public works need to be built by those with the proper construction skills. It's not a matter of just hiring as many hands as you can as cheaply as possible. And so I support the gentleman from Georgia in his comments, and I urge the defeat of this amendment.
Gentleman from Washington.
I rise in opposition to the amendment and strike the requisite number of words. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong opposition to this amendment. Some in the minority continue to try to repeal Davis-Bacon, despite the House being on record supporting the protection of labor standards. 2 weeks ago, the full committee voted to strip the anti-Davis-Bacon provision that was added by the chairman of the subcommittee. A similar amendment repealing Davis-Bacon was offered during the consideration of FY 2012 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. It failed on a vote of 183 to 234. I have been a long-time supporter of Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements. It helps ensure that local projects that provide local jobs with affordable middle-class wages. The law protects the government from contractors trying to win federal contracts by bidding too low to attract competent workers. I strongly oppose this amendment. I'd point out, if there is a problem here, it's because we do not do the wage surveys on a continuing and consistent basis. That is a real problem, and that rests with the Department of Labor, and we need to make sure that they're doing their part of the equation. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. Do any other members seek recognition on the amendment? Gentleman from Georgia.
Words.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me just say that the Davis-Bacon Act prevents competition for construction contracts from artificially depressing local labor standards. The Davis-Bacon Act will prevent subverting the prevailing wage laws, which will lead to shoddy construction and substantial cost overruns. Under the prevailing wage laws, contractors are forced to compete on the basis of who can best train, best equip, and best manage a construction crew, not on the basis of who can assemble the cheapest, the most exploitable workforce, either locally or through importing labor from outside. The Davis-Bacon Act does not require a union wage. It requires prevailing wage based upon surveys of wages and benefits that are actually paid to various job classifications of construction workers, such as iron workers in the community, without regard to whether they belong to a union or not. According to the Department of Labor, a whopping 72% of the prevailing wage rates that issued in 2000 were based upon non-union wage rates. A union wage prevails only if the Department of Labor survey determines that the local union wage is paid to more than 50% of the workers in that job classification. Now, higher wages and skills result in greater productivity and lower cost. It's so much greater among high-wage, high-skilled workers that projects that use high-skilled workers and high-paid workers often cost less than those that use the low-wage, low-skilled workers due to repairs, revisions, and lengthy delays. The opponents who claim that the government could save billions by eliminating the Davis-Bacon protections, they ignore the productivity quality, safety, the community development, and the other economic benefits which contribute to the real cost-effectiveness of Davis-Bacon. A study of 10 states where nearly half of all of the highway and the bridge work is done in the United States showed that when high-wage workers are paid double the wage of low-wage workers, they built 74.4 miles of road bed and 32.8 more miles of bridges for $557 million less. Driving wages down will not help balance the budget, and the Davis-Bacon Act will improve our local economies, and it will result in increased productivity. I am convinced that, again, we have people with good intentions that want to save us money. But if you pay cheaper wages, you will have to employ less skilled workers. If you hire less skilled workers, they will, in all likelihood, have to have work redone. There will have to be repairs. It will extend the costs. It will extend the time. And ultimately, it will cost our taxpayers more money, and we will not get the efficiencies that each and every tax dollar should have, because they're hard-earned tax dollars. And our taxpayers don't give them up lightly. But when we do pay our taxes, everybody in this body and across this country wants to make sure that we get the best bang for the buck. Davis-Bacon would give us that result. It has proven that. The studies show that. And I would submit that this amendment is ill-advised and it should be defeated.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any other members seeking recognition on this amendment? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan. Those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The noes appear to have it.
I would ask for a recorded vote.
The gentleman has asked for a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate.
Amendment number 2, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Sherman of California.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Will the clerk read the amendment?
Objection, the amendment will be read.
At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used in contravention of the War Powers Resolution 50 U.S.C. 1541.
Gentleman is recognized.
I had the clerk read the amendment because it's a simple one-sentence amendment. It says that none of the money in this act can be used deliberately by the President to violate the law. in particular the War Powers Resolution, often referred to as the War Powers Act, which is found in Title 50 of the United States Code. This is the same amendment I offered to the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. Some 208 members of Congress voted for that amendment. The only argument against the amendment at that time was that it wasn't exactly appropriate or relevant to the Homeland Security's bill. After all, I was preventing the funding of violation of the War Powers Act with the funds provided to the Department of Homeland Security. Now that I offer this amendment to the Milcon bill, it is relevant. This is a bill that provides tens of billions of dollars for the Defense Department, and it is necessary and appropriate if we are going to adopt a policy that says that money is not going to be appropriated for deliberate violation of our law, that we apply this amendment not only to the Defense Appropriations Bill, but to this second bill that funds the Pentagon. Why is this amendment necessary? Because so many administrations have embraced the idea of an imperial presidency, the idea that a president can send our forces into battle for unlimited duration, for any purpose, unlimited in scope. This is not what the Constitution and the law provides. The War Powers Act is the law of the land, and it says the President may indeed commit our forces. But the President must seek congressional authorization and must withdraw within 60 days if that authorization is not provided by the affirmative vote of both houses of Congress. In Libya, we face not an attack on the United States, not an attack on our allies. But even in this circumstance, this President, like others, claims that he does not have to follow the law. The administration has implied that there are substitutes for congressional authorization. They've implied that resolutions by the United Nations, the Arab League, or NATO can be a substitute for congressional authorization. And they implied that consulting congressional leaders, a lunch with leadership, is a substitute for the affirmative vote of both houses of Congress. It is time for us to stand up and say, no, Mr. President, you actually have to follow the law. Obviously, this amendment is even more apropos to the Defense Appropriations Bill. But we will be dealing with that weeks from now. The President has been violating the War Powers Act for many weeks. It is time to act today. Moreover, if we put this amendment only on the Defense Appropriations Bill and don't put it on this bill, then we invite the administration to try to figure out clever accounting ways to use the billions of dollars provided to the Defense Department in this bill to carry out operations in Libya. We should not invite a loophole hunt. We should put the same restriction on both of the bills that fund the Defense Department. Now, if we can pass this amendment, the President will, I hope, request an authorization from Congress to take action in Libya. And he will have to accept an authorization that will, I expect, be limited in time and in scope. Perhaps it will say that only air forces and not ground forces can be committed. Perhaps it will require renewal every 3 or 6 months. There may be conditions on what funding sources. For example, perhaps we could use some of the $33 billion that Gaddafi was stupid enough to leave invested in the United States in ways that we could find and that we have frozen, rather than use taxpayer dollars. Congress will ask some tough questions, and we may put some conditions requiring certain actions by the Benghazi transitional government. We would ask why the Benghazi government has refused to disassociate itself from the al-Qaeda fighters and the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group men who are in their midst, and why they will not remove from that transitional government those who have American blood on their hands from Iraq and Afghanistan. This is not just the issue of an aggrandizing president, it is also the issue of a derelict Congress. Continuing military action in Libya should be conducted only consistent with American law. If Congress habitually appropriates funds, knowing that those funds will be used to violate the law of the land, then we are complicit in undermining democracy and the rule of law in the United States. The question is not democracy and the rule of law in Libya. The question is democracy and the rule of law in the United States.
Who seeks time in opposition? Gentleman from Texas.
I don't claim time in opposition.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
I rise in support of the amendment, Mr. Chairman, and I will happily accept it. And I would like to strike the last word.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment because it is evident that the administration is in direct violation of the War Powers Act, which requires the President to either certify to the Congress that the United States has been attacked, or there's a national security interest of the United States at stake, and if not, then we need to be notified. And I think still waiting for the administration to talk to us to justify, to explain the involvement of U.S. forces in Libya. And now we read over the weekend that the administration may send U.S. forces, our young men and women, into harm's way in Yemen. I mean, what are we going to do, Syria next? The Congress of the United States has an obligation to make sure that we, in the stewardship of our precious tax dollars and the responsibility we have to ensure the protection of our men and women in uniform and the people of this nation, that we are enforcing the War Powers Act, that we are directly involved as a partner in the defense of the United States. The administration has persistently and consistently refused to involve the Congress in these decisions to send our men and women into Libya, whether or not we're going to go into Yemen. Mr. Sherman's amendment is very reasonable and points out that simply we're not going to spend any money in violation of the law. We're not going to spend any money in violation of the War Powers Resolution. The distinguished chairman of the whole committee, the Committee of the House, is unable to speak, but I have to say that Mr. McClintock's editorial, the positions that the gentleman from California has taken, I agree with completely. The action in Libya, as Mr. McClintock has said, could not be there could not be a more clear violation of the War Powers Act than the President's involvement of American armed forces in Libya. The Congress has never been notified. There's never been any, obviously, no attack on the United States. There's no strategic interest of the United States at stake in Libya or in Yemen. Where else is he going to send our troops without notifying the Congress and the people of the United States as required by the War Powers Act? So, Mr. Chairman, I want to rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. I want to rise in support of the chairman, Mr. Tom McClintock of California's eloquent defense of the War Powers Act, and urge the House to adopt Mr. Sherman's amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Does any member seek time in opposition to the amendment? Does any member seek any discussion in relation to the amendment? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
On that, I request to...
Gentleman from Washington.
I request a recorded vote.
The gentleman requests a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Amash of Michigan.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I need to reserve a point of order on the gentleman's amendment.
The gentleman reserves his point of order. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the start of this Congress, the House made important changes to the way the institution operates. We began by ending earmarks. Americans understood that the practice favored representatives' pet projects, while the taxpayer was left to foot the bill. Earmarks diverted our constituents' hard-earned money to low-priority projects, and, even worse, appeared corrupt. Americans started to lose confidence in their government when they saw their representatives using public funds for personal gain. In a similar vein, this Congress continued last Congress's prohibition on, quote, monuments to me. Like earmarks, when House members name federal programs and buildings after themselves, Americans can't be sure whether the programs are funded because they're worthwhile or because they benefit a House member personally. The appropriations bill we're considering today has a prohibition on monuments to me that mirrors the House rules and bans naming programs and buildings after current House members. My amendment extends that same prohibition to current senators and the President. Ending, quote, monuments to me is an important step to preventing the waste of taxpayer dollars and to ensure that our appropriations are in the best interest of the public, not the personal interest of elected representatives. I ask you to support my amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes without objection.
Certainly agree with the gentleman's sentiment. It's important that we, as members of Congress, don't spend any money to name anything after ourselves. It's inappropriate. I would think anybody that would, it just ought not be done. There is, I know that my colleague from Texas, Mr. McCall, has also been working on this to prevent the use of taxpayer funds from being spent on monuments built at taxpayer expense to members of Congress that are still living. This rule is in place for the House of Representatives. It ought to be in place for the Senate and the President of the United States, but unfortunately the gentleman's amendment imposes a duty on federal agencies in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21. So I regret, reluctantly, have to raise a point of order against the gentleman's amendment that it proposes to change existing law, Mr. Chairman, and therefore constitutes legislation in our appropriations bill in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21, and that the amendment seeks to impose additional duties on a federal agency or entity. And I ask for a ruling from the Chair.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? If not, the Chair will rule. The Chair finds that this amendment includes language requiring a new determination by the relevant executive branch official of the current membership of a body in the legislative branch. The amendment therefore constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 2 of Rule 21. The point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. Are there further amendments to the bill? Purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment. Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Flores of Texas. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following new section. Section 4, none of the funds made available by this Act shall be available to enforce Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007, Public Law 110-140, 42 U.S.C. 171-42.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment is quite simple. During the 110th Congress, there was a section added to the Energy Independence and Security Act that bans federal agencies from entering into contracts for procurement of alternative fuel sources unless the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions are less than or equal to such emissions from an equivalent conventional fuel produced from conventional petroleum sources. This amendment would simply prohibit the government from enforcing this ban on federal agencies funded by the underlying bill. I was not yet in Congress when the Energy Independence and Security Act was considered, but Section 526 raises concerns over national security, economic security, and it creates bureaucratic uncertainty. Section 526 was added to this bill to stifle the Defense Department's plans to buy and develop coal-based or coal-to-liquids jet fuels. Environmentalists allege that this coal-based fuel will ultimately produce more greenhouse emissions than would traditional petroleum resources. This allegation is uncertain at best and does not account for ongoing improvements in carbon capture technologies in association with CTL technology. My amendment prohibits funds in the bill from being used to enforce Section 526. Section 526 makes it more difficult for our Defense Department to become energy independent, to rely on more domestic and more stable sources of fuel instead of sources located in more unstable, volatile parts of the world. This is very problematic for our Defense Department by creating uncertainty about what fuels DoD can procure, and it discourages development of new sources, particularly reliable domestic sources of energy supplies for the armed forces. Section 526 opens DoD up to quarter administrative challenges for every fuel purchase it makes. Per a July 9, 2008 letter to Senator James Inhofe from the Pentagon, such a decision could cause significant harm to the readiness of the armed forces because these fuels may be widely used and particularly important in certain geographical areas. Not only of certain extreme environmental views, policies, and regulations like Section 526 burden American families, hurt job creation, and hurt American businesses, but they are now potentially causing significant harm to the readiness of the armed forces. The Defense Department should not be wasting its time studying fuel emissions and should not have to be stifled by the arguments over how to interpret a small section of an energy law. This is an unacceptable burden to continue to place on our nation's military, and it is an unacceptable precedent set in regard to America's energy policy. I urge my colleagues to support passage of this common sense amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the amendment and to strike the last word.
Moves to strike the last word and is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of the gentleman's amendment. The United States is the Saudi Arabia of coal. We've been blessed by the good Lord with extraordinary resources. We have the apparently world's largest supply of shale gas, shale oil, yet the administration is doing everything in their power to prevent us from even finding or locating additional shale oil or gas. The administration is doing everything in their power to prevent us from drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, which we've done for decades cleanly, safely, economically. We could create hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs in the United States if the administration would simply get out of the way and let Texans run Texas, let the Gulf states, and let unleash American ingenuity and the energy community to do what they do best, produce domestic oil and gas cleanly and safely. The jobs that are produced in the Gulf of Mexico and the energy industry across the United States are safe, high-paying, high-quality jobs that the economy, the people of America desperately need. Mr. Flores has brought a very important amendment to the floor which would expand the use of petroleum derived from coal. The United States is blessed with abundant amounts of coal, and this federal law, Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act, discourages the production of liquefied gas or fuel from coal, and that's a vital part of our energy future. We understand as constitutional conservatives, as the new majority in the House, that the United States needs to continue to invest in alternative technologies for the future. We are all in support of finding new ways to generate electricity to move the United States into the next era of energy beyond petroleum. But in the meantime, in the short term, we need to drill here and drill now. We need to use every available resource that the good Lord has blessed this nation with in a way that's obviously clean, safe, ecologically friendly, and we can do so. We've done it in Texas for years. Mr. Flores has extensive experience in the energy industry, and I'm proud to represent the energy corridor of Texas. Houston is to the energy industry what California and Silicon Valley is to the computer industry. And we've proven time and time again that we can produce oil and gas safely, cleanly. We desperately need to open up drilling in the Gulf. This administration has deliberately and systematically shut down drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, which increases our dependence on foreign oil, while the administration has used our tax dollars and its influence with the International Monetary Fund to attempt to prop up and support Brazilian exploration for oil and gas, discouraging American development of oil and gas. It's a policy that continues to drive up the unemployment rate and drive down the production of American oil and gas. And Mr. Flores' amendment will allow us to expand the production of one vital American resource, that we have in abundance, and that's coal. So I strongly support the gentleman's amendment and urge its adoption by the House, and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix.
I rise in opposition to the amendment, and I move to strike the requisite number of words. I also rise today in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. Section 526 of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 is intended to ensure that any alternative fuel that is introduced to replace conventional petroleum-based fuels must have greenhouse gas emissions that are less than or equal to the fuel it is replacing. That is a common-sense approach. The Department of Defense alone is the single largest energy consumer in the world. Its leadership in this area is critical to any credible approach to dealing with energy independence issues. Section 526 provides an opportunity for DoD to play a substantial role in spurring the innovation needed to produce alternative fuels, which will not further exacerbate global climate change. I would like to congratulate Secretary Mabus, Secretary of the Navy, for his energetic approach to trying to find alternative fuels. And I think he, as Secretary, has done an outstanding job. He has put the Navy on a path towards energy independence and to reduce the amount of petroleum products that we're using today. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this very short-sighted amendment.
The gentleman yields back.
I yield back.
Any other members seek recognition for this amendment? The gentleman from Tennessee, for what purpose do you rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The amendment I've offered past week would simply reduce information technology account in the VA by $70 million and increase the same account by $70 million. My intention is to make it clear to the Department of Veterans Affairs that we must see progress on efforts to integrate the Department of Defense and the VA electronic medical record. It's unthinkable that as we make the transition from the military back to the homeland as seamless as possible, we have a system as befuddling as the one we have, where a service member literally needs a piece of paper or a copy of his record or her medical record to ensure information isn't lost transitioning between the two systems. When a severely injured patient is released and transferred from Walter Reed to the VA Center at Mountain Home in Johnson City, Tennessee, all the information regarding their injury and transfers can be terribly difficult to access. That shouldn't be the case. This is why I support Chairman Culberson's report language, which recommends that the Department of Veterans Affairs set aside $70 million of the overall $3.25 billion in the information technology account for the virtual lifetime electronic medical record. I would, in fact, like to strengthen this language by putting in the bill to ensure this money gets spent on integration. The VA and DoD maintain the two largest health care systems in the nation, providing health care to 6 million veterans and over 1.5 million active duty service members, respectively. Within the VA alone, there are over 1,500 different facilities that provide care to veterans. To provide this care, the DoD and VA both rely on electronic health record systems to create, maintain, and manage patient health information. But the two agencies for years operated different systems that can't talk to each other. Let me give you an example. $10 billion has been spent. A soldier leaves the military. His record can't be transferred electronically to the VA. And I just had someone in my office just before I walked over here on the House floor that showed where an electronic medical record system would have prevented delay in treatment of a veteran. This general lack of cooperation between the two departments has occurred for years at the collective cost of billions of dollars. I first became aware of this problem when I arrived in Congress and didn't realize it had been worked on for years. I applaud the Appropriations Committee for highlighting the need for the VLER in its committee report, and I think this language should be put in the bill to ensure the VA spends the money on this purpose. A lifetime electronic health record system would improve the delivery of care to service members transitioning from the military to civilian life. As a physician myself, I know the importance of having an organized and efficient electronic medical record system. In fact, I helped put an electronic medical record system in my office for over 70 providers and tens of thousands of patients. I do understand the difficulty, and I know how hard it is to be done, but know the importance of it. I hope the committee will adopt this amendment and work on strengthening it in the final bill to ensure we make clear the VA to the VA that this integration must be a priority, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yield.
Yes, I will yield.
We're trying to vote on the Flores amendment. Could you have waited until we voted on the amendment and then make your 5-minute speech? This is totally irrelevant to this debate.
I apologize to the gentleman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Do any other members seek recognition on the amendment? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it, and the amendment is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill? For purpose, does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment on the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Kaufman of Colorado. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to provide disability compensation under Chapter 11 of Title 38 United States Code to any veteran for post-traumatic stress disorder if the required in-service stressor claimed by the veteran is related to the veteran's fear of hostile military or terrorist activity and the places, types, and circumstances of the veteran's service did not include a combat zone.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Amendment.
The gentleman reserves a point of order. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I stand with the American people in wanting to make sure that our returning service members from Iraq and Afghanistan are taken care of. The signature wound in this war is emerged to be post-traumatic stress disorder. Since 2008, over 100,000, almost 100,000 claims for disability based on post-traumatic stress disorder have been awarded at a tremendous cost. But the concern is, again, that these veterans are taken care of. In July of last year, new rules were promulgated as to the eligibility criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. And what they did was they no longer required the service members to relate a specific combat occurrence or occurrences to their post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it is my belief that these rules are too loosely written, and that what we ought to have is more definition to say that someone who's never served in a combat zone should not be eligible for post-traumatic stress disorder disability benefits, not treatment. Certainly they would be eligible for treatment. But I understand that this amendment will require the Veterans Administration to create a definition and make decisions on something they currently don't do, which is service in a combat zone. And I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I certainly can appreciate the concerns that the gentleman raises that have caused him to offer the amendment. But I wanted to remind the gentleman that the awful incident that occurred at Fort Hood in Texas, there were a lot of our service members who were present and who experienced that awful, awful situation. Under this amendment, it would prevent the veterans, once those people are discharged, and the service members from being able to take advantage of the benefits of the Department of Veterans Affairs because they were at Fort Hood as opposed to in Afghanistan or Iraq or some other place of hostility. And also I would remind the gentleman that the service members who operate our unmanned vehicles, aerial vehicles such as the Predator, which has great capabilities for causing destruction in war. It's one of our great weapons, but they actually can see it on video in real time the death and the destruction and the dismemberment that is caused by the utilization of that, although they're in Nevada. And the weapon is being actually having its impact in Afghanistan. And of course, because of that, they would be disqualified. And under this amendment, I think the gentleman's point is well taken in wanting to make sure that only those people who are entitled to veterans benefits in fact get them. But I think that there are perhaps some problems in the artful drafting of the amendment that perhaps should be clarified, and because of that I'm reluctant to support it, and I must oppose that amendment.
I understand. I reclaim my time, and the chairman has raised a similar issue, and I certainly agree with him about the issue of expanding the definition in this amendment to reflect terrorist activity that would be beyond a combat zone. Again, we're not reflecting. Certainly, treatment would be available. We're not talking about that. We're merely talking about disability compensation. I probably disagree with you as a combat veteran myself on the ground side on your UAV example. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to withdraw this amendment, realizing that it is out of order because of the fact that it really impedes on authorizing versus appropriating. And it is my intent, certainly, and I'd be happy to work with the gentleman from Georgia as well as the gentleman from Texas in terms of coming up with a definition that makes sure that we take care of those veterans who are most in need. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman begs leave to withdraw his amendment. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the amendment is withdrawn. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to enter into a contract using procedures that do not give to small business concerns owned and controlled by veterans, as that term is defined in Section 3Q3 of the Small Business Act, 15 United States Code 632Q3, that are included in the database under Section 81F of Title 38 United States Code. Any preference available with respect to such contract, except for a preference given to small business concerns owned and controlled by service-disabled veterans, as that term defined in Section 3Q2 of the Small Business Act, 15 United States Code 632Q2.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer an amendment that would level the playing field for our nation's veterans when it comes to contracting with the federal government. After putting their lives on the line, and at a time their families and their careers on hold in the service of our nation, America's veterans deserve every consideration we can give them to adjust to life once they return. Veteran-owned small businesses are part of the American fabric, and as a government and a people, we must do all we can to encourage them. Here are a few facts. According to the most recent census, over 2.4 million of our nation's veterans are now small business owners. Veteran-owned companies now make up 9% of all U.S. firms. The Small Business Administration now estimates that 1 in 7 veterans are self-employed or are a small business owner. And finally, nearly a quarter of veterans say they're interested in starting or in buying a small business. Despite these encouraging numbers, the truth of the matter is veterans are unemployed at a higher level than any of us find acceptable. For instance, the unemployment rate for young veterans returning from Afghanistan and Iraq reached a staggering 22% last year. Mr. Chairman, this number is simply unacceptable. We must work to reduce this number, and it should be the explicit stated policy of all government agencies to assist veteran entrepreneurs. As our nation struggles to achieve an economic recovery, we should be looking to utilize the talent, expertise, and leadership skills of our nation's veterans. These men and women volunteered to selflessly serve our country, and in order to succeed, must display self-discipline and leadership. It is characteristic and character traits like these that should be nurtured and fostered to help our economy grow again and put people back to work. Veterans have served our nation nobly across the world. Now their innovation and expertise can help lead our American recovery. Ultimately, we must all be focused on putting our constituents back to work, and I believe, Mr. Chairman, that this amendment will help to do that. This amendment will give veteran-owned small businesses preferences for contracts in this bill equal to any group eligible for a preferred consideration except for service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. The practice of the federal government providing preferences to encourage government to do business with certain groups is well established. This amendment does not diminish preferences to any other group. It simply extends to veteran-owned small businesses the same level of consideration. The amendment would apply to all federal contracts authorized by the Military Construction and Veteran Affairs Act and would be attached to any portion of state and local projects funded with federal dollars. To preserve the integrity of the program, small businesses are considered those defined by the Small Business Administration, and eligible businesses must be registered veteran-owned businesses with the Department of Veterans Affairs. The VA's Center for Veteran Enterprise maintains a database of certified, registered, veteran-owned businesses. In many cases, this amendment will simply be codifying existing practice and ensures that it will continue to be the policy of our nation. Mr. Chairman, veterans have sacrificed much for our nation. It is only fair that if any group is given preferential contracting status, that veterans receive it as well. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Rise in support of the gentleman's amendment and move to strike the last word. Mr. Bishop, I'm happy to yield to my friend from Georgia, however.
Does any member rise to claim time in opposition?
No.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Please, go ahead.
We support the amendment. Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman move to strike the last word?
No, I don't.
The gentleman from Texas moved to strike the last word.
Yeah, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to express the committee's strong support for the gentleman's amendment. We are all in agreement that the nation needs to look first to attempt to hire our veterans who have served this nation, to attempt to encourage the businesses that are developed and built by veterans to thrive and to prosper. And it's the gentleman's amendment is a great way to encourage veteran-owned businesses to thrive. We should, in the work the federal government contracts out, do everything we can to encourage the development of and the hiring of small businesses owned and operated by veterans. And we strongly support the gentleman's amendment and urge its adoption. And I yield back. The
gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Move strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me just say that the gentleman's amendment is very, very well taken. I fully support it, and it works in tandem with some other legislation, some authorizing legislation that I think the chairman, Mr. Culberson, and I, along with Mr. Diggs and Mr. Young, and many, many others on a bipartisan basis have offered, called the Hiring Heroes Act, which basically supports our veterans as they come back to make sure that they can be gainfully employed and that they are duly allowed to participate in the economy, to work, and to engage in gainful employment. I think that this amendment, as far as small businesses go, as far as veterans' preferences, is very well taken, and I think that we ought to do that as well as everything else we can possibly do to make sure that the transition from full-time active service to the civilian population of our country on the part of our veterans is fully supported by this Congress and by the people of the United States. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose is the gentleman from Washington?
I move to strike the last word, and I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. Veteran-owned companies are a great asset that we should be further encouraging. These businesses obviously play a positive role in the economy by providing not only jobs, goods, and services, but also are reducing unemployment amongst veterans who are already struggling with the unemployment rate greater than that of the general populace. Furthermore, as Mr. Bishop has noted, the government has done poorly in reaching its 3% contracting goal for veterans. For example, agencies' contract awards were below 1% from 2003 to 2006. The most recent figures for 2009 show agencies awarded only 1.98% to service-disabled veterans. We must do more to ensure that our veterans are transitioning from soldiers to civilians and are actively encouraging new opportunities for vets. I believe this amendment will help the Department of Defense and VA do better. I support this amendment and urge its adoption.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members seek recognition on the amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
I'd like to request time to engage in a colloquy with the gentleman
does the gentleman
Texas.
move to strike the last word?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fattah, brought a matter to our attention that is very important and significant. And I think it's appropriate that we ought to at least examine that in the form of a colloquy here on the floor as we consider this Military Construction Veterans Affairs and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill. Mr. Chairman, many veterans have returned home from Iraq and Afghanistan with severe disabilities. And when their service results in a disability, we have a duty to help them. And one way that veterans receive this help is through the use of guide dogs. Now, the way the process works, veterans are assessed and they are trained for orientation and mobility. If the veteran needs a guide dog, information on how to contact guide dog schools is provided. Essentially, the veteran is referred to a nonprofit. There's no funding provided directly from the VA to these nonprofits, and with the cost associated with training these dogs, it takes time to raise the money, which in turn causes a backlog for veterans as well as for non-veterans. We have to look at this issue and see what it is that the Veterans Administration can do to help, because these dogs mean so much to those who need them.
Will the ranking member yield?
I yield to the chairman of the subcommittee.
Mr. Bishop, the gentleman from Pennsylvania has raised a very important matter that we need to look into in the subcommittee as we move into conference, and I want to reassure the gentleman from Pennsylvania that the subcommittee and I will work diligently with him to look further into this issue and find ways that we can help make sure that veterans who need guide dogs and service dogs get them.
I'm sure that Mr. Chairman, that Mr. Fattah and other members will be very appreciative of you, and we thank you for your comments, and we look forward to working with all of our colleagues to support the veterans and their families.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll be delighted to yield to...
I just want to mention a program called Pets for Patriots. I happened to attend an event here just about a week ago where there's a national organization being created to get pets for our returning veterans, and especially some of those that have very serious injuries. So I think there is a need for this, and I think it's been demonstrated, and I commend Mr. Fattah for his diligence and for your help in raising this issue.
Thank you very much for your comments, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
We're done. Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee now rise.
The gentleman from Texas moves that the committee of the whole do now rise. Those in favor of the committee rising say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the committee of the whole does now rise.
The House will be in order. Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2055, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2055 and has come to no resolution thereon. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 today.